Thank you, Stevie. I'm looking forward to this. Sad note with Rusty Staub's passing. He played with Rusty and obviously still broadcast all the Mets, won the MVP in 1979. Long time no chat. Does a great job for us. Is Keith Hernandez. Keith, welcome. Nice to talk. How are you today? Okay, pal?
I'm good, Chris. Thank you. Just getting into the swing of the season, and unfortunately, it got off to a kind of a sad start. I mean, a great start. The Mets won, looked terrific, but we lost a great one in Rusty.
Yeah, this really hit you, Keith. I read the quotes. Sounds like you really had to take your time to talk to the reporters yesterday. I knew you were close to Rusty. I didn't know he had that kind of impact on you. You and him were pretty close. Give me some thoughts on that for a sec. Go ahead. All right, we'll see if we get this straightened out with the phone line. We're having these bad cell. We'll see if we can get that straightened out here momentarily, and we'll get Keith back here in a sec. Hernandez, of course, won the MVP with Willie Stargell in 1979. Staub, 4 years of 4 teams of 500 hits each team, which people do not realize. 500 hits for Houston, 500 hits for the Tigers, 500 hits for Montreal, and 500 hits for the Mets. He had 2,700 career hits. He's a .280 lifetime hitter. A lot of home runs, good postseason player. Staub was a hell of a player. I did not realize, I knew he was good, but much, much better than people thought, and raised millions of dollars for charities. All right, Keith, I'm sorry there. I got you back. I know you were very close to him. You probably didn't know that much about him until you became a teammate. You know what surprised me most of all, he was a hell of I saw him a lot, but I didn't realize, Keith, how good a hitter he was. A tremendous offensive player. How about that for a sec?
Well, almost 300 home runs in his career, over 2,700 hits. He drove in almost 1,500 runs. If he didn't love New York so much, Chris, he could have moved on to an American League team and DH like Molitor. Paul Molitor did with Toronto, and DH'd and got 3,000 hits, and he'd have been in the Hall of Fame.
Wow. You think he could have gotten those extra couple of hundred hits in the American League? Interesting. Yes.
Oh, absolutely. He basically pinched hit for the Mets, and you couldn't tell me. He couldn't run, but he'd have been a perfect DH guy, and he certainly there would have been a team he would have been their number one DH, at least from the against right-handers, and I do think that he could have got the 200 plus hits that was needed to get 3,000 hits. And I asked him one time, Chris, why didn't you go to the American League? My goodness, you played baseball your whole life. It's an automatic ticket to the Hall of Fame. And he said, I had my restaurant, and it was more. And I love New York. It was just more important to me. I had played for 6 teams, and I just got rooted in New York, and that was more important to me. So, and it showed in his charitable endeavors after the game, which you just mentioned, and the widows and orphans of the firefighters and the police officers and the first responders. Also, the Catholic charities were over 7 million, I believe it was over 7 million meals were served to the poor and homeless. So these were the kind of things that he did, the kind of person that he was.
I did not realize that the Astrodome, back to baseball for a sec, Keith, it sounds like the Astrodome really helped him. Came up with the Houston 45s. They played outside those first few years. He was 19 and 63 when he came up. They moved to the Astrodome, and he said, I read the quote today, he learned not to try to, he realized that he wasn't going to be able to hit everything out of the ballpark in that huge place, so he became a better hitter based on the stadium. What's your thoughts on that for a sec? I thought that was interesting. You're a scientific hitter. How did the Astrodome help Rusty Staub?
Well, I read that quote also today in the paper, and I found it quite interesting and quite logical. Rusty was 6'2", 215 pounds when he played, and back in '63, he was a big guy. And they were playing before the Dome. They wanted him to hit home runs, and then when he went to the Dome, and he went to the old Dome, the original dimensions, when you had to hit it over that. Remember, that was screened in down the left field line. It was 340 down the lines, I believe, were the dimensions, and you had to hit it over a walkway, a second level into this for that to be a home run, and of course 396 in the gap, and I believe it was 421 or something in center field. It was Death Valley, and it was the biggest ballpark in baseball by far. Nothing came close, other than maybe St. Louis, but Old Bush, but that was not as big. So you had to hit line drives there, and that's what Rusty was, a line drive hitter.
How hard is it to have 500 hits with 4 teams? I mean, you can make an argument, Keith. He should have had a retirement day with Montreal, Detroit, Houston, and the Mets. I mean, that's hard to do. I mean, you have 2 of them in St. Louis and New York. He's got 4. How unique is that for a major league player?
Well, I think if he's the only one ever to do that, he's not the only one. He's in a select group, and also he's one of the 4. Well, I think he's the only one that did that. He's one of the few that around 4 players, I think, that hit a home run before he was 20 years old. He was up in the big leagues when he was 19, and he didn't come out of college. He came out of high school. It's pretty phenomenal. He was a great player and a great hitter. I can tell you that my father, who was my mentor and taught me how to hit when I was a kid, the Giants, when the Colt 45s and the Mets came into the league in '62, the only games we got to watch on TV were Game of the Week and when the Giants played the Dodgers back in L.A. Those are the only games that we could watch. When in '62, when the Colt 45s came in, they also televised the Colt 45s, and then the Astros. When they became the Astros. But Dad made us watch those games and made us watch Rusty, all the good left-hand hitters we had to watch. And Rusty was one of them, and a young Rusty Staub in 1963 and '64.
Wow. So Staub had a lot of influence on you growing up. Tell him the story about the little book that he wouldn't give you about opposing pitchers. I thought that was interesting. I read that today, Keith. Tell the audience that story. Go ahead. He
was the best at getting pitchers. He would sit down there. I just posted a photo today on my Facebook page as well as my on Instagram as a picture of Mookie, Rusty, and Rusty sitting at the edge of the bench closest to home plate at Shea Stadium. I'm sitting on the bat rack to his right, and then Mookie's to my right, and we're watching a pop-up, or it looks like a fly ball into left field, and that's where Rusty sat, and he watched those pitchers right there with that bat in his hand, intently looking for a tip-off. And he had a red book, like a telephone book, and a small travel telephone book. And he had a list of pitchers in there going back to the 60s and their tendencies and tipping their pitches on breaking ball. Normally it was on the breaking ball or off-speed pitch. And I asked him for it when I joined, and he said, no, you have. I said, why? And he goes, you haven't earned it. Well, I made a mistake with the story, and it would have been much more profound. It's all over the papers now, but the correction is that he gave me that book finally not when he retired, but when I retired.
Oh, wow.
And
wow.
So I said, well, what good is this for me? He goes, hey, you asked for it. Here it is. And to this day, I still have it, and I leafed through it, and there's like Joey J in there and Jim Merritt going back to the 60s. It's really, really interesting.
Now, you won the MVP. You won a championship with St. Louis. So when you get to the Mets, you were well established. What'd you learn from Rusty about hitting when you got to New York after all those years with the Cardinals?
I just liked, he was a bench player then, and so he watched intently, and he watched me hit, and I would go in and put to him in certain situations, or not certain, after certain at-bats, and, and talk about my at-bats to him, if I was hot and what that guy threw me. I remember one particular time in Los Angeles, we were playing the Dodgers in Valenzuela. I was up against Valenzuela late in the game in a tough spot, a clutch spot, and that was the year that Valenzuela really had his good fastball. It was the last year he had that pop on his fastball, and he threw me a 2-2 fastball inside corner, and I took it. And Eddie Montague was the home plate umpire, and I thought the pitch missed by an inch, but it still was a pitch I couldn't. It was just a great pitch that Valenzuela made. It locked me up. And I remember looking down as the ball passed over the inside corner, and I said, and Eddie, it was an inch inside. Eddie Montague said strike three. And I didn't argue because it was just too close to take. It was just a pitcher's pitch. And I walked back to the dugout, put my bat in the rack and my helmet, and Rusty was standing up against the rail, and I took my position next to him, and he said, that was a hell of a pitch, Keith. He goes, not too many are going to hit that one. So that's an example right there. So,
he was well aware. How about all the philanthropy? Yep. You knew him well there, the firefighter thing, the 9/11 thing. I mean, he established all this in New York. And Montreal loves him too, so does Houston, but he established this in New York. He had the two restaurants. I used to do shows in those restaurants back in the late 80s, he had one up on 3rd Avenue, right? And he had one in Midtown. I used to do Saturday mornings there all the time. Mike Shannon coming all the time. And he was always good to me. He was always good to me. But I didn't realize really until much later how much money he raised, Keith. How about that for a sec? Let me hear.
Well, he devoted himself to it. It started out very small. And then when 9/11 happened, it was just overwhelming for everybody. And Rusty could have... not just typical what Rusty. He just rolled up his shirt sleeves and did the work. And he did most of the work. He had people helping him out, but it was Rusty's endeavors. He was knee deep in everything, totally involved, and it was a passion for him. So I wasn't aware that he did the Catholic charities for a while. I thought it was, my goodness, he was so much time put into the surviving members of 9/11 and the widows and orphans of firefighters and first responders and police officers. I was absolutely flabbergasted that he actually took on the Catholic charities and the feeding the poor and needy. It was just another wonderful thing that he did, and he went in, knee deep and waded in and got it done.
And you saw him last week, right, Keith? You just saw him recently, correct?
Yeah, that's what hit me so hard was I saw him more than maybe a dozen times in his illness, and it was 11 times he looked awful, and he was really weak and had a hard time speaking. There was only one other time where he made improvement and looked up, and every time that I saw him, I left depressed and concerned and worried. On the Saturday before he died, it was like his last rally, and I saw him, and he was alert, and he had lost 50 pounds. He was in ICU for a month at least, and he was losing weight, and he looked great. His eyes were clear. He wasn't in pain. He was always in a lot of pain. He was talking. He was lucid, and I left there really upbeat, and then I get a text the next day, Sunday, that he took a turn for the worse, and he didn't pull out. I was always worried that his heart wouldn't survive this because he'd already had the 2 heart attacks. And sure enough, cardiac arrest took him.
Very underrated, no question. And you did a great job with it yesterday. Let me ask you one on the Mets, and I know it's a bad transition, but they look good to me, Keith. I don't know about Gonzalez overall. We'll see, but... And I know they're not, they're not going to run 9 200s athletically. I get that, but Syndergaard's going to be good. DeGrom's going to be good. I think they got a little something to prove. You know the team well. You see them in spring training. Could this be a resurgence year in your eyes with the Mets? What's your take on that?
I think that they're going to surprise a lot of people. I mean, last year with the injuries was kind of a freak, and I don't think that's going to happen this year. You never know. I doubt it. There's no reason that Syndergaard's going to, get hurt. He's a young guy. You never know he can hurt his arm, but that's the intangible in the sport. But it's a veteran team offensively. Sandy Alderson does not believe in defense. Although I think he's come around a little bit on the importance of defense. And you know how I feel about defense. If I've got a great pitching staff. And it's a strikeout staff, and I don't need defense. Well, there's never been a pitcher that strikes out 27 guys in the course of a game.
Right.
The ball's going to be put in play, right. And I want defenders out there. So They're a base at a time team. They're a home run team. Ironically, they scored the 9 runs yesterday without hitting a home run. That was fantastic. And it was exciting. Guys going first to third, not just one base at a time. But I think in the long haul, this team will be a one base at a time team. I think Nemo has really improved. He got on base 4 times yesterday in a leadoff spot. Rosario, we'll see. He's in the 9 hole. It's the first time I actually like a pitcher hitting 8th in a lineup, in this particular lineup, with Rosario, who can run at the bottom of the order, and Cespedes is the first time I like someone hitting 2nd if you're going to bat a hitter 9th. So Cespedes really becomes the 3rd hitter when you flip the lineup. And you got Rosario that has speed, 2 fast guys that can get on in front of Cespedes. So I agree with that. So I'm optimistic about the Mets. It's a very poor division, as you know. The Nationals are a very, very good team. I think they're going to give them a run for their money.
Interesting. Keith, great job. It's good to talk to you again. You know that. Keep up the good work. We'll check in the course of the year. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Anytime, Chris.
Take care. Keith Hernandez, thoughts on Rusty Staub and the Mets. Nice job there. We continue on a busy program. Cell phone, we got through it barely, Ed.
Come on. It was good for 10 minutes there.
We come back right after this. Don't